Today I'm really excited to have as my guest Ada Amaro. And Ada and I were able to meet just a few weeks ago. I am lucky enough to be able to facilitate a writing group at East Lyme Senior Center on Thursday afternoons. And Ada joined my group. And she has a story that she wants to tell, absolutely a story worth telling. It's life before television. And I just said, was there life before television, Ada? And she said, yes, there was. And it really wasn't that long ago. I just looked up and found out that television, the number of television sets in the United States rose from 6,000 in 1946 to some 12 million by 1951. No new invention entered American homes faster than black and white television sets. By 1955, half of all United States homes had one. Now people have multiple sets in their homes. So Ada, welcome. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I'm so excited to have met you, to know you, and thank you for being willing to come and talk about what your experience has been. You're talking about a different day, a different time. Do you remember your first television set?
I remember my grandparents' first television set, which brings me to another issue here in that in the 40s, most people lived in multi-generational family housing.
Which is really nice because you get the wisdom of the grandparents, the energy of the parents, and also the energy of the third generation, the kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So almost everybody I knew lived with some member outside of their immediate family, either a grandmother or an aunt or a cousin or whatever. And they were, mainly 2 and 3 family houses in my neighborhood. But as I said, my first television was really in my grandmother's apartment.
Which was different from your house.
It was a house with 2 families.
Okay, got it.
One on the downstairs and we were upstairs.
Oh, okay.
Now, I only remember 2 channels at that time, one being Channel 8 in New Haven. And then there was a local channel in the Hartford area. I believe it was Channel 30, which was mainly like this, a community station.
Cable access kind of thing.
And so I do remember that, but I wanted to talk about the difference between life in the 40s, the late 40s, as opposed to once television entered. The first thing I noticed was that there was a lot more visiting.
Visiting, people would go from house to house.
Especially on Sunday afternoons. And the oral history was available to the children because usually the typical setup was that the adults would be sitting around a table or sitting in the living room and the kids would be on the floor. Now we were raised, children should be seen and not heard. So we didn't interrupt too much. But we got the family history, we got the oral history because there were no distractions. Now, once television came into play and once sports dominated the weekends, that was it. From that point on, the men, generally speaking, were in the living room with the television. The women were still probably in the kitchen having coffee, and the kids were elsewhere until it became a 2-television home. And then the kids were either in the, quote, rec room or in the basement or somewhere else. So that ended really the passing down of the family stories and even the history of the area or country or whatever. It no longer existed.
That's a tragedy. My mother used to talk about going, I think, with her Aunt Nellie, I think was her name, and she would have her get dressed up after Sunday church and put on some white gloves or carry some white gloves, and then they would go from house to house. And I think she said, let's go calling. I think is what
calling, right.
That was the expression, let's go calling. So, and they would stop in and have maybe a cookie or a cup of tea or something with different neighbors or family relatives that they hadn't seen for a while, and hear that oral history. So your grandmother got the television set. You had 2 channels, so you went from your place to her place to go sit and watch a show with her? Is that how it first began?
Well, it was kind of, there were certain things that you would want to be involved in. Now, all the men in the neighborhood would come Friday nights for the Friday night fights.
Oh, boxing.
That was a big thing.
Boxing or wrestling?
Boxing.
Boxing, okay.
I told you about our whole family social life became, it was planned around the various TV shows.
The favorites, all the favorites.
And when you didn't have a television, I was telling you prior to this interview that every Sunday night, my aunt and uncle would pick us up, and we would go to the aunts who had the television, watch Ed Sullivan, and come home.
Sunday night was Ed Sullivan, and I remember Lawrence Welk was my mom's favorite show.
Saturday night.
Oh, is that Saturday night? I don't remember. So, and that would be, she would listen to all the brass and then the bubble machines.
Oh, yes, the champagne lady.
And the lovely Lennon sisters. I remember that too.
Yes.
So on Sunday, Ed Sullivan.
Right. Tuesday night, we went to our next door neighbors for Uncle Milty, the Milton Berle Show, who at that time was the premier comic in the country.
He was very funny. He was
and very, very popular.
Yes, yes.
So that was Tuesday night. Friday night was one of my favorite shows to this day. I Remember Mama.
Oh, what was that about?
It was about, I believe, a Swedish family who came to the United States. And, of course, Mama was the heroine.
And
because
she had old customs. She did things differently, I'm imagining.
And she had the wisdom. So she had a couple of kids. And, you know, it was not comic at any way or shape. It was, there was always a positive message.
Kind of like Father Knows Best or Donna Reed, I'm
But
thinking.
even above that, it wasn't trivial. So that was Friday night. After school, one girl that I knew had a television, and I was telling you before, you know, just crossed my fingers hoping that she would invite me to see Howdy Doody.
And Howdy Doody was kind of a clownish character.
He was a puppet, and you know what? He was made right here in Stonington, Connecticut.
Really?
The puppeteer was from Stonington, Connecticut. I wish I could remember his name, but I think we could actually find it. But there was Howdy Doody, Princess Summer, Fall, Winter, Spring, Buffalo Bob. Now, I'm going back over 70 years.
Right.
I can't believe I remember it.
That's
so
great.
that was the big attraction during the day. But then, as you know, Lawrence Welk came later.
Okay.
But before television, there were other things. First of all, besides the family, the oral history, and the visiting, I remember spending a lot of time in the evenings, like coloring. There was a lot, as I said, a lot more visiting. Families thought nothing of going to another family's house on a Tuesday night, maybe to play cards. Now, if somebody asked me to play cards while I was working on a Tuesday night, I would look at them like they were crazy. But if you're not going to stay up till midnight watching television, what else are you going to do on a Tuesday night?
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And so, you know, that was certainly different. I can remember also that we stayed out later in the summer.
We used to have to come in when the fireflies came out and the streetlights went on.
Well, see, being in these multi-family houses, almost all of them had a porch, and none of them had air conditioning. So I could walk for blocks and see families sitting on the porch and knowing them all. And, you know, you'd take a walk to the drugstore or something, and, you know, you'd see this family, and you'd stop and say hello, and that family. We didn't have a lot of crime because there were people watching.
It was like the neighborhood watch program that we have now, but on an informal basis. And where was this community? Are you talking?
New Britain.
New Britain.
New Britain, Connecticut.
And New Britain isn't really known for necessarily one of the safest, most pristine areas.
It was then.
It was then.
It was then.
There you go.
I mean, nobody had a two-family. Had two cars. And that was the other thing about the suburbs. Now, I knew no one in a single family house. Because don't forget, those started to be built post-World War II. And, you know, the suburbia didn't exist. One of the reasons was there was only one car in a family, if that. So people had to live where the bus came and went.
Sure.
And we had wonderful bus service right till midnight, you know, every 20 minutes. You could go to Hartford from New Britain, no problem.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And ridership was good, I'm sure. That was what everybody did. Were there streetcars as well?
No, I'm
No
not that
streetcar?
old.
Well, I mean, I don't know when they were taken away. You know, we do.
Well, they were still in Boston when I lived in Boston, but no, we had very good bus service. But if you wanted to live in suburbia, even a housewife would not be able to get to a grocery store. The bedroom communities for New Britain were Berlin, Newington, Southington in some respects. And so if you were a housewife living in those areas, you were isolated.
Very isolated, which is not really good, I don't think. You're also a psychiatric nurse, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So you understand the social implications for this,
Absolutely.
the emotional implications, the trauma that might occur, and the lack of support. And what does that speak to?
Isolation. The thing is, like in the multi-generational families, of course, you had your family, but also the neighborhoods were very stable. I mean, I was born into the house my father was born into.
Oh, nice.
And I could say that for 90% of the houses on the street. And so you were very secure. There was always somebody watching. And this brings me also to a point. I know we're digressing from the television, but there were disabled people, mentally disabled people in the community, and they did just fine. I happen to have a friend whose uncle was at least, he was probably in some respect, I know the term today is challenged, but he was probably retarded.
Cognitively impaired.
Right.
Okay.
Let's be socially correct,
Okay.
politically correct.
Okay.
But anyways, Lester would leave his house. He had a job. I remember him carrying his lunch bag. And when he got to his job, he'd have to call his mother. And the same coming in. Well, he lived in the community for years and years and years, and I never heard one thing about him because the community watched out for
They
him.
took care of him, right.
We took care of each other.
Which is what we should do, right? Take care of each other, support each other, find ways to make it so people can be successful.
But you see where television came in? Nobody was watching anymore. They were watching their television, not their neighbors. And so the other difference is, you know, we didn't have storm doors and storm windows. I mean, if somebody sneezed, our houses were so close, if somebody sneezed next door,
You would know somebody
You would
either had
know it.
allergies
Yeah.
or kind of a flu or something was
but
coming.
you know what, you take storm windows and storm doors, you take everybody in front of a television, and you know, increased insulation, all the things we've done to make our homes more comfortable. They also worked in reverse in that we were not aware of our neighbors.
And if you were in planning, if you could have a dream or a wish, what would you do? How would you make it so that we are more connected?
Well, that's not a single answer.
Too complicated.
Well, I was talking about your group.
Okay.
So, for example, I said any group, any task group can be a therapeutic group if some of the things happen that would be improve somebody's life. One of them is just being in a group and identifying with a group elevates people's self-esteem if they're accepted in the group. The other thing is peer support. Encouraging one another is very therapeutic. So identifying with a group, encouraging each other, lending an ear, all of these things are therapeutic. And can be. It depends on who's leading the group and the composition of the group. Generally speaking, like people who are more like one another, similar to one another, like we're old, have more of a connection.
Sure.
You know, if you threw, you know, a 20-year-old in there, I don't know how much she would get out of the group, although my caregiver, Lily, loves it.
Oh, nice.
But, you know, that's one of the things about groups that really we should be encouraging more elderly people to be involved in groups.
Well, and that's what I try to do in that group, is just to...
And you accomplished
Well,
that.
thank you. I appreciate that. I try to offer suggestions, encouragement, what struck me as poignant, and then helping them to build on that. Really no criticism. It's all about building on the success, and I think that's what groups can do for each other. So I like that.
And also mental stimulation.
Absolutely.
You know, just putting pen to paper makes you think.
Well, it's so interesting too, because people are like, I don't know where that came from, you know, like, and these thoughts, it's almost like a dream state where the dream is kind of a daydream, where the daydream comes out on paper and people are actually expressing themselves, and we talk about it and support each other in that process. So
Now, another thing that was different after television is reading. I remember as a real little girl going to the library every Saturday and taking out as many books as was
they would
allowed.
allow, right?
And definitely reading on Sunday because there were only sports shows on television. Did an awful lot more reading. Would go through 6 or 7 books every week. And my friends all did the same thing because we only had 1 or 2 channels, and you didn't like everything on television
No, of
even
course
then.
not.
And so there was a lot more reading. I'm sure there was a lot more writing because reading leads to writing.
Absolutely, right.
And I think also there was probably more things like community theater, clubs. Now, I know my husband was in Rotary for years. It's hard to get people out to attend a club at night if they're working. I know it was awfully hard for me when I was working. But if there was nothing to distract you at home, like television or now videos, you were more likely to go. To go to a lecture or go to a concert in the middle of the week.
Sure, and there's good offerings in the area. You know, there's art openings, there's lectures going on, there's book discussions. There's all kinds of good things to stimulate your brain and your ability to think and process. And I always think it's good to hear other people's opinions and to have the discussion and have the discussions go deeper. And I think that is sometimes a lost art that we need to help develop within people.
Well, communication is a lost art. I mean, I have a granddaughter that doesn't even care about the phone anymore because she's on the iPad talking to her friends till all hours of the night. They don't even know how to communicate like you and I are communicating. They have to use a machine to communicate. So I'll talk about technology another time.
Another time, but
I think families
let me go ahead.
I think families were far more cohesive, and there was a broader inclusion. Like now we think about the nuclear family. Back in the day, I mean, most of my relatives I could walk to, and my mother was part of 6, so that's saying a lot.
That's really nice. And you had people and cousins and family meals, big family meals, extended, where aunts and uncles were invited to join, or you were invited to join with them. Nice.
So the nuclear family, you know, once jobs required people moving, if you wanted a promotion, you had to move, along with television.
Well, that was one of my first thoughts, because I don't know if you know, but my husband and I have lived all over the country. So one of my brothers called us corporate nomads, because we've lived in Nebraska, Utah, Massachusetts, Vermont, back to Nebraska, now Connecticut. So we have lived in a number of different places. And with that, there's losses and gains. And I have friends from each location. I'm one of those that kind of hangs on to friends and people, but it's hard, and it's hard for the kids, especially in that reinitiation. Sometimes it's good to start a new page or a new leaf, but you always lose something in that transition. Yeah.
And I'm on the other side of the coin, in that I have only lived in New England, mainly Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, all within a 2-hour drive of New Britain. And now as I'm thinking, and I think I wrote in the essay back in our last meeting,
one of our prompts, yeah.
I wish that I had given myself the opportunity to live elsewhere in another part of the country, because I think that you know, you really get to know people if you live there, not just visit for a week or two. And I think, you know, if I could do things over, I wouldn't be so anxious to settle down in one place. I wish I had, you know, maybe lived on the West Coast or lived in the South, or I wouldn't want the North because I don't like the cold, but, you know, just exposing myself
to different opportunities, because people are different in different parts of the country. It's a very, you know, it's a very big country, and if you go coast to coast, how people feel about different things and how people greet each other and how people talk. The mores and the culture is completely different, north to south, east to west. So absolutely. And what did Mark Twain say about traveling? It's kind of one of the greatest things you can do to eliminate or reduce prejudice.
It's not unless, you know, until you live with people, and also share meals with people, because that's when they're least defensive and more relaxed. And you know, I really think that was one part of my life that I missed out on. But on the other hand, you know, we were in the Navy, or my husband was in the Navy, and that brought together people from all kinds of backgrounds and areas.
Right. So tell me about actually when you were watching television. What was that like?
Well, first of all, we watched as a family.
Right.
Because, you know, Ed Sullivan appealed to everybody. They always had a puppet on and, you know, a gymnast or something, as well as maybe a concert singer. So it was viewed together, and it was a big deal when we got our TV tables. We actually had these little snack tables. And
TV dinners, too.
I thought TV dinners were gourmet.
Well, they were. Swanson is the name I remember. Do you remember which brand of TV dinner you used to eat?
I can't remember, but I know for my kids, they had a TV dinner with like a little hamburger and a little cookie. And I would only let my kids have that if we were going out. So they thought the TV dinner
was the cat's
meow. The cat's meow. And I would let them have it in front of the television if we were going out as a treat. But families, you know, watched everything together. And, you know, I really, besides the fact of television invading family life, I think sports are the opiate of most men. You know, and, you know, now there are games on 24/7.
Right.
I mean, we have ESPN.
Right. And there's Netflix, and there's Hulu, and there's Amazon, and there's, right, you can just go down the list of different, and then people have satellite dishes, and then there's thousands of channels. And
you know, there used to be, you know, Sunday football. Then there was Monday football. Then there was Friday football. And then there's Tuesday. And then sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed in the spring, there's baseball starting, there's still hockey going, there's still, I mean, my husband is so confused as to what he's going to watch. Sometimes he watches two things at once with these games.
Does he have screen within a screen, or does he have two television sets set up?
No, he has, I don't know.
Or does he run from room to room?
No, he's got two going on at the same time. I don't even know what he does in there.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's really so distracting.
Sure.
And that's the other thing.
Have you read, do you know, like, what does it do to our brains as far as the neurons?
Oh, well, it's anesthetizing. But even, you know, back to sports. Now, my cousin lived in the Boston area, and before television, the whole family would go to a baseball game on a Tuesday night. Whereas now, why bother?
Well, it's really expensive, though. Have you ever looked, or have you looked recently for tickets? And a hot dog, you think a hot dog might be a couple dollars? Like, you know, it's not for an American family tradition, it's very expensive. So
I'm so old that when we were in Boston, we did not have air conditioning, and we lived on a fourth floor walk-up with a tar roof. So we used to go to the Red Sox stadium really just to cool off, and we sat in the bleachers, and they were $1 because we were married students. So
those were the days, right?
Yeah, I understand, like, going to a Yankees game, it's probably a couple of $100.
I'm sure, easily, right? It's so expensive. So.
And, you know, back in the day, we had the Navigators, so it was a, you know, it was a relatively inexpensive way to entertain a family.
And that's a fun thing to do, go to see the Norwich Navigators. And there are other options, you know, there are other things to do. So if you were to offer advice to a young family, would you suggest maybe hold off on having television available to your...
One television.
Have one television in your house and then have it be more of a family event or activity.
One of my friends who's a social worker said, houses are too big and have too many televisions. It should be one television, the whole family watches together. Of course, now there's so many offerings, you'd never get a consensus. But, you know, back in the day, there was only one. So you wanted to watch television, you were watching the Ed Sullivan Show.
So we have to do ranked choice voting, I think, is what we need to do. What's your first choice? And then kind of go and vote and then kind of eliminate through consensus how we're going to select if we were to do that.
But is there a chance of that happening?
Well, I think, like, my daughter is a young mother. My granddaughter is 2.5 years old, and she certainly takes good care and eliminates or reduces the amount of screen time that my granddaughter, and she likes to watch Daniel Tiger, who's kind of a takeoff on, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, talk show host for children. And yeah, so, you know, it's just really, really sweet and supportive. So all of that is really, really good.
And watching as a family, I can remember one of the ways I got back to graduate school was I had 12 years apart between my oldest and youngest, and my husband came home one night and said, well, what's new? And I said, Big Bird went to camp. He said, you've got to get out of the house.
Oh, boy. But, you know, I really value that, and I really value the idea that you watch with your children, because I will watch with my granddaughter what Daniel Tiger does and what the episode is and what the lesson learned for Daniel Tiger was that day. And the songs. I like to learn the songs that they sing on the show, then she and I can sing those. So if you make it like a family, again, activity, and then it's a learning activity, and it's not so anesthetizing, then you start to have that stimulation, and it's repeated in different environments, and then the opportunity for that to generalize is going to be enhanced and improved. So
what you're talking about, though, is there's communication.
Right.
See, that isolative boob tube, putting a kid in front of a television and forgetting about the kid, going away, there's no communication.
Right, right. No, absolutely. I totally agree. We used to call it the idiot box, was the other term that we had for it. And remember back in the days where you had the rabbit ear antenna?
And you had to run outside.
To adjust it sometimes. Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I do remember the rabbit ears. And I also remember the other thing is, television was not on 24/7.
No.
Like after the late night news, which was probably maybe 11, you got test patterns till the next morning. So it wasn't so consuming. I mean, you can turn on television at 3 a.m. and watch a movie.
Right, right. And there's always, like we said, Netflix, and we can stream it. Well, Ada, it's about time to wrap up. You've been a lovely guest, and you'll have to come back. I'd love to have you as a guest again sometime.
Thank you, Katie.
Oh, thank you. Are there any last-minute pearls of wisdom you want to offer?
I can just make the comparison. I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know what's coming in the future, but if you could possibly limit the amount of television and do more family stuff, I think that would be a good start.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And please come again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.